November 18th, 2022. Charles de Gaulle International Airport, Terminal 2F, noon. A 76-year-old man sits on a bench in the waiting room with a small bag at his feet. Next to him are papers, a book, a thermos. Everything is as usual. A place he knows better than any other on Earth. The ambulance arrives quickly. The paramedics are doing everything they can. At noon on November 12th, Mehran Karimi Nasseri died of a heart attack at Charles de Gaulle Airport, the same place where he lived for 18 years, the same place he returned to a few months before his death. He was identified by airport employees. Some of them had been working here since he first arrived, 34 years ago, with a small suitcase, not knowing what would remain forever. His story begins where most stories end, at the point of loss. In 1988, an undocumented man was stuck in the international transit zone of Charles de Gaulle Airport. He couldn't enter France without documents. He couldn't fly to the UK without documents. He couldn't return to Iran without documents and without desire. He couldn't go anywhere except the terminal, and he stayed in the terminal. At first because he had no choice, then because he had no desire to leave. His story became the basis for a Steven Spielberg film starring Tom Hanks. Spielberg paid him $250,000. Nasseri took the money and stayed at the airport. This is the true story of a man who found home in a place that is, by definition, a place of transition, not residence. Mehran Karimi Nasseri was born in 1945 in the city of Masjid-e-Suleiman in southwestern Iran. This was a British concession area, the oil wells of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. His father worked as a doctor for the company. His birthplace already created legal ambiguity. Born on British soil, he was Iranian by birth. His mother, he claimed, was a Scottish nurse.
My mother was a Scottish
nurse. Other sources say she was Iranian. Nasseri told various versions of his origins throughout his life, none of which can be fully verified. This would be strange if it weren't central to his fate, a man whose identity has never been fully established. In 1973, he went to the UK to study. The University of Bradford, Yugoslav Studies Department, a strange choice for an Iranian from an oil city. But Nasseri always gravitated to places that weren't quite what they seemed. Several years of study, then, according to him, a return to Iran, and arrest for participating in protests against Shah Reza Pahlavi, deportation without a passport, without documents, the beginning of wanderings. This version of his biography is impossible to verify. Not a single document confirming either the arrest or the deportation. But it was on this version that his entire legal status was built. It was supposed to explain why he couldn't return to Iran, why an Iranian passport wasn't an option, why he was a political refugee and not just a man without documents.
Он запрашивал статус в Германии, Голландии, Франции и Великобритании, но везде получил отказ.
Great Britain, everywhere, refusal. He wandered for several years, from country to country, from consulate to consulate, from refugee shelter to refugee shelter. In 1981, the UN Refugee Agency in Belgium finally issued him a document, official refugee status, a travel document, a piece of paper that said, this person exists, he is protected by international law.
Эта бумага говорила о том, что данный человек существует и имеет защиту международного права. Это подтверждает их.
Then he lost it. In 1988, he was traveling by train from Belgium via Paris to London.
Он направлялся в Великобританию, которую искренне считал своей исторической родиной.
Somewhere at Paris's Gare du Nord, his briefcase disappeared. His refugee papers, his travel document, everything that confirmed his existence in the eyes of states. According to him, it was stolen. According to other versions, he inadvertently left it behind or mailed it. He himself gave different explanations at different times.
Он сам давал разные объяснения этому происшествию в разное время.
At Gatwick, British border guards inspected him, confirmed the papers were gone, and literally put him back on the plane, the first flight back to Paris, as if they were returning a parcel to the sender. French police detained him at the airport. They couldn't let him out. No documents, no entry permit. They couldn't deport him, no place to go. Iran wouldn't accept him. Belgium issued documents, but they were lost. It was impossible to prove
Круг
Belgian
замкнулся,
citizenship.
и Мехран
The circle
Карими
was
Нассери
complete.
стал человеком без
Mehran
места на
Karimi
карте.
Nasseri became a man without a place on the map, and his place became the first terminal at Charles de Gaulle Airport. A bench in the waiting room, that very same one. A red plastic bench near the Paris Bye-Bye bar. A sad name for a man who never left. It's morning. He emerges from the restroom, washed, combed, in a clean shirt. He sits down on the bench. He takes out a diary and a pen. He writes. He writes a lot, every day, for years. Thick notebooks filled with observations, reflections, a chronicle of airport life. Then he reads. Then he smokes a gold pipe, his personal pride, his symbol. He eats at McDonald's. He didn't like it, but there was no other. Airport employees brought him food, books, coffee. They gave him a nickname, Lord Alfred or Sir Alfred. This is no coincidence.
Они дали вежливому мужчине прозвище «Лорд Альфред». Это прозвище, короче, вместо его всего тирана. Когда-то давно великобритании гражданские сарабы, чиновники все стирации, как Альфред Мехран. Мое имя теперь сэр Альфред Мехран. Понял? Альфред Мехран. Нет, сэр Альфред Мехран, с запятой. И заглавное «С» в «сэр» — это английский титул, хорошо запишем. Мое имя теперь сир Альфред Мехран. С запятой после «сэр». Да, именно так. Заглавные титулы. Не отвечаю иначе. Хорошо, запишем. Только так и никак иначе. Требование называться сэром стало сюда сэр. Мужчина активно строил новую идентичность, так как прежние варианты были для него невыносимы.
A man from the country that had expelled him or from which he had fled was unbearable. The one the world offered, a refugee without papers, a man without a country, a man without a place, was even worse. He invented a third, British, aristocrat, Sir, a man from a country that had always been out of his reach and therefore always remained ideal, without the disappointments of actual residence, without the need to test what the world was really like.
В итоге он изобрел третью идентичность, провозгласив себя британцем, аристократом и сэром. Он выбрал страну, которая всегда была для него недосягаемой, и потому оставалась возможной именно из-за этого страха. Он все время находил способ так и добираться до нее. Мужчина писал постоянно, и его многолетние подробные записи заполняли десятки толстых тетрадей.
A traveler, a citizen of the world, a man in transit, not stuck, but moving. The difference was significant. Stuck, a victim.
Эти слова звучат как явная отстраненность и своеобразное признание его выбора. Также это походило на завуалированный отказ от ответственности, в нечто среднее между произведением искусства и медленной катастрофой. Нассери фактически превратил свою жизнь в нечто среднее между произведением искусства и медленной катастрофой. В 1995 году Бельгия официально предложила ему вид на жительство. Этот документ оповит многих для Галлетеритив Брасселс, Бейтон Академия.
In 1995, Belgium offered him a residence permit, a document that would allow him to return to Brussels, find housing, and start a life. Nasseri
Бумага давала ему реальный шанс начать
The
нормальную
explanation,
человеческую
the
жизнь
papers
заново.
said Iranian. He's
These
not
papers say
Iranian.
Iranian. I am
He's
Sir Alfred Mehran. The documents
And
are
as long as
official.
the documents
Sign
don't
them.
call him
Not
that,
until they call me
he
by my
won't
name.
sign
I
them.
refuse to sign.
His lawyer,
Sir, we cannot
Jean-Louis
proceed without your
Bourget,
signature.
spent
Его
hours
личный
trying to
адвокат
convince him.
Жан-Луи Бурже
It was no
провел с ним
use.
долгие часы, пытаясь
France
убедить
also
принять
offered a
статус.
residence
Все
permit.
уговоры же туриста
Same
оказались
problem.
официально оформить
Same
его
line in the
никакого
document.
действия.
Same denial.
В 1999 году ситуация вокруг него кардинально изменилась, или пока была окончательно измениться. Французские власти наконец выдали ему документы, где фигурировало близкое к желаемому имя.
He could leave the airport. He could enter France. He could go anywhere. 11 years of waiting were over. Nasseri signed the papers. And he didn't leave. Philippe Bargan, a psychologist and chief physician at Charles de Gaulle Airport, has been observing him for all these years. After Nasseri received his documents and stayed, Bargan told reporters, he's afraid to leave this bubble he's lived in. It's like a drug addiction. He needs to be weaned off the airport gradually. Finally receiving the documents after 11 years of waiting is a huge shock. Imagine, you wait 11 years and then sign the papers in a few minutes, and that's it. It catastrophically changes your perception of reality. Bargan added, and it makes you wonder, what kind of society is this if this can happen to someone? By then, Terminal 1 was his world. He knew every corner. Every employee knew him. New passengers, tourists, business travelers, families with children would sometimes spot him on a bench with a book and diary and ask the staff, "Who is this?" "That's Sir Alfred." He lives here. Tourists took photos of him. He became a landmark. The airport became his biography, his biotope, his only borderless territory, because the international transit zone is technically a no man's land. He was nowhere. He was everywhere. He was in between. Journalists would come to see him every few years. He would give interviews. Sometimes he would speak English, sometimes French, sometimes Farsi, a language he claimed he neither spoke nor knew. His stories contradicted each other. His mother was Scottish. No, Swedish. No, he never said she was Scottish. He wasn't Iranian.
I am happy to give a detailed interview.
Persian. Other times he would speak Persian fluently. Was this a conscious construction of an image? Or had a man who had lived for 18 years in a space between worlds lost the ability to distinguish between what was real and what wasn't? Or was it something else? A man who found it profitable to be an enigma. In 2003, Nasseri signed a deal with DreamWorks, Steven Spielberg's production company. $250,000 for the rights to use his story. A lot of money.
В 2004 году на экраны вышел знаменитый фильм «Терминал». Главную роль в этой картине великолепно исполнил голливудский актер Том Хэнкс.
Tom Hanks. Audiences around the world watched the heartwarming comedy about a man stuck at an airport. They laughed. They cried a little at the end. They left the theater touched. It was a good film, but the story that inspired it was completely different. The film's Victor Navorsky is optimistic, kind-hearted, temporarily stranded by circumstances, who in the end walks away to freedom. Nasseri is a man who could have left, who received documents in 1999, who was offered help, housing, a ticket, a social worker, a visa, everything. Who stayed? Who, in 2022, with money and documents and 15 years of a relatively normal life behind him, returned? To the waiting room, to the bench. Because that was his place. He carried a poster of the film The Terminal, propping it against his bench like a painting that explained who he was. It was an advertisement for a film about a man forced to live in an airport, posted by a man who lived there by choice. This contradiction is his entire story. None of the people involved in his case could ever give a definitive answer to the question, what exactly was happening to Nasseri? A genuine trauma? A mental disorder? A conscious lifestyle choice, manipulation of the system, or some combination of all of the above. In 2006, he fell ill, not fatally, but seriously. He was hospitalized.
В 2006 году он заболел серьезно и был госпитализирован. Пока он выздоравливал, сотрудники аэропорта разобрали его простой лагерь. Они очистили скамейку, тетради, чемодан, радио и книги.
When he returned, his bench was different. His spot was taken. The airport had changed while he was gone. He ended up in a Paris homeless shelter, then in a care home for the elderly. He wrote a book, Terminal Man, a memoir that began with the story of his life and ended with something akin to a manifesto for a man without territory. The book was published in a small print run. Few read it. Years passed. 16 years away from the airport, his name rarely appeared in the news. In September of 2022, airport staff saw him again in the terminal. Sir Alfred was back, with the same bag, the same notebooks. He was living in the waiting room again. He didn't explain why. He simply returned, like people returning home. November 12th, 2022. Heart attack. Right in the terminal. Not in the hospital, not in a nursing home, not in someone's apartment. At the airport. The same place where he lived for 18 years. The same place where he died. That's what makes this story defy conventional interpretation. It's too easy to tell it as a tragedy, and that would be true. It's too easy to tell it as a story of systemic failure, and that would also be true. The bureaucratic machine created a man without a place. European immigration laws created a category of people for whom no host state could be found. That's reality. But there's another reality. In 1999, Nasseri received his papers. He could have left. He didn't. In 2006, he was discharged from the hospital, could have lived in Paris. He returned to the airport in 2022. What is this? Perhaps the answer is that one place can become the only place a person can call home. That 18 years spent in one space, even if that space is a transit zone, leave a mark deeper than any identity card. That identity can be lost in Paris, or can be rebuilt in the name Sir Alfred Mehran. or found in the red plastic bench next to the bar, Paris Bye-Bye, 34 years old, Charles de Gaulle Airport. At first, because he couldn't leave. Then, because he didn't want to. Then, because he couldn't live without it. He died where he lived. The last thing he saw was the waiting room, the board announcing departures. People with suitcases, flying somewhere. He wasn't flying anywhere. He was simply there, just as he wanted. On the death certificate, under permanent residence, they wrote the address. Terminal 2F, Roissy Charles de Gaulle Airport. It was the only address that could have been written honestly.